Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the City of Glendale's 12th annual commemoration of the Armenian Genocide. I am honored to be here with a packed Alex Theater tonight on the solemn occasion of the 98th anniversary of the start of the Armenian Genocide, and to cherish the memory of our ancestors who perished at the hands of the Turks. I'm sure that every single Armenian in this room has a grandparent or other relative that went through the horrifying events of the early 20th century. Even though we personally have not gone through the genocide, the pain and the trauma of the events have been passed on to us. The accounts of the suffering are unforgettable, and they have left an indelible mark on the psyche of every living person of Armenian heritage. Now, as a young student in high school, I was asked to write an essay about my family background. Of course, I could have written something about my loving parents, my annoying brothers and sister, or my wonderful life. But in the 1 hour I was given to write the essay, I chose to write about my grandparents and their suffering. When I put my pen to the paper, all that came forth was the sad story of the massacre of 1.5 million Armenians. So the genocide has left its mark on all of us. We can't wipe it out, we can't forget it, and we should not forget it. For 98 years, we've tried to tell the world that there was a genocide, the first of the century, committed by the Turks against the Armenians. Finally, we've had some success, as every year 1 or 2 more nations accept and recognize the genocide. So far, 21 nations have accepted it. The truth is, Turkey planned and executed the almost entire annihilation of a whole nation, a whole group of people. The USA, the most powerful country in the world, the nation that sees itself as the moral standard, the standard bearer for all of humanity, has unfortunately avoided the recognition of the genocide. But the US can hold no moral ground until and unless it recognizes once and for all the Armenian genocide. Oh, sure, the President and Congress dance around the issue each year, referring to events as the tragedy of 1915, or even today, as President Obama called it, the Medyagen. Very politically correct words towards Turkey, but corrupt morally, ethically, and historically. But one brave man, not too long ago, our ambassador, John Evans, once dared to call the murder of a nation a genocide. And you know what happened to him? He was quickly relieved of his duties, only because he used the words Armenian genocide. Oh, there was outrage at the time, true outrage. A US senator at the time sharply criticized the Bush administration's handling of this issue, stating that his firmly held conviction that the Armenian genocide is not an allegation, a personal opinion, or a point of view, but rather a widely documented fact supported by an overwhelming body of historical evidence. The facts are undeniable. The senator went on, in a letter to the Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, to say that an official policy that calls on diplomats to distort the historical facts is an untenable policy. And he later told his constituents that the Bush administration's failure to recognize the Armenian genocide was inexcusable. That senator is now President Barack Obama, who today, as president, bows his head to Turkey and follows their gag rule of genocide denial that he so forcefully condemned before taking the Oval Office. The LA Times has said, someday the Turks will admit they committed a genocide, but we do hope that America will recognize it before the Turks do. I urge communities around the U.S. and the world to speak up and demand that their community, state, and nation recognize the Armenian genocide of 1915. Human rights affects us all, and the genocide denied is a genocide repeated. Այսքան չարիք, թե մորանան մեր որդիկ, թող ողջ աշխարհ գարթա հայուն նախադինք։ I would like to end with a line from my grandfather, Urfatsi Hagop, who saw the atrocities firsthand as a young boy and who later became a preacher and who always ended his evening prayer with a famous plea to the Lord. Ուր էր Աստված, երբ գոդորում էր մի ողջ ժողովուրդ, which means, where were you, God, when a whole nation was wiped out? We have a wonderful program tonight, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm honored to have so many guests and dignitaries in the office, in the Alex Theater. I wish my office was this big. From the Glendale City Council, my colleagues Laura Friedman and Zare Sinanyan. Representing the Consul General, Mr. Ardag Kalustyan. Our City Treasurer, Rafi Manukian. Our City Manager, Scott Ochoa. Our Assistant City Manager, Yasmin Beers. Many members of the Glendale City Management Team. We have from Burbank, formerly from Glendale, now the new Burbank City Clerk, Zizette Mullins. We have from our neighboring city of Sierra Madre, Mayor Pro Tem John Harabedian. We have members of the Glendale Unified School District, members of the GCC Board of Trustees. We have from Senator Carol Liu's office, Talin Mangioglu. We have a representative from Audrine Nazarian's office. We have former Assemblyman Anthony Portantino. We have Rita Hajamanukian from County Supervisor Michael Antonovich's office. We have a special guest, an actor. We don't get many actors in Glendale. Jamie Kennedy, who is going to be the star of a new movie filmed in Armenia and dealing with issues of the genocide and how it affects us in Armenia and in the United States. The movie is Lost and Found in Armenia. Thank you, Jamie Kennedy, for joining us. I promised the next person that I would try and get through my remarks as quickly as possible. He has a plane to catch from Burbank Airport to Sacramento. I would like to invite up to the podium the representative of the 43rd Assembly District, Mr. Mike Gatto.
Thank you, Councilman Najarian. Actually, if truth be told, I could listen to you talk all day. And congratulations on your re-election. You have made us all very proud. How does one begin to comprehend the Armenian genocide? All of us have lost a loved one at some point in our lives. It is a tough experience. It is one that evokes powerful emotions in us, ranging from sadness to anger to despair. A loss of a loved one is hard. It is hard on the individual, and it is hard on those around him or her. Now imagine a small nation losing 1.5 million individuals. Losing so many, in fact, that everyone lost a loved one. Everyone knew someone who did. That, my friends, is the magnitude of the Armenian genocide. Today, by commemorating those losses, we don't just mourn what the Ottomans did to the individuals. We mourn what they did to our society. Armenians are an ancient, accomplished, intelligent, and cultured people. They have affected our nation and the world in religion, the arts, in medicine, and so many other fields. For millennia, Armenian religious leaders have courageously stuck up for the Christian faith. Armenian authors and artists have beautifully chronicled life around this globe, particularly in our state. In medicine, Armenian pioneers have developed vaccines and therapies for everything from viruses that plague the world's children to diseases like Alzheimer's, which plague our senior citizens. So how much did the Turks steal from the world with the great crime? They stole innumerable fathers, sons, mothers, daughters, friends, and loved ones from the Armenian nation. They stole the innocence of the 20th century, encouraging later dictators to follow the Ottoman model because of perceived impunity for their actions. And they stole from the world the contributions of countless Armenian minds. Despite the somber tone of this evening, it is wonderful to be gathered here today among so many friends of Armenian heritage. Your presence is a testimony to the fact that the Ottomans did not win. And I know that the new generations are going on to do great things. People like Zara Papazian, who interns for me many hours a week, gives her time while maintaining a 4.0 GPA at UCLA. People like Mary Manukyan, who works for me and is just an incredible young woman with a big heart and an awesome future. People like you are emblematic of the generations who have come to thrive and prosper despite the genocide. Now, every year that I have served in the legislature, which is 3 now, I've authored the resolution to mark the tragic events of 1915 through 1923. I do it to express our society's contempt at the great crime and our sense of loss at the tragedy. Such resolutions are more than just a piece of paper, my friends. They are a statement of our values as Californians. They serve as a reminder to everyone in this state and overseas of the great friendship between Armenia and California. And they show a strong resolve that we will come together, here, now, and always, to teach the new generations, and I see many of that generation here tonight, that intolerance to those who are different can lead to terrible results. I close with this thought. It is impossible to know that the world understands these concepts, the concepts that I just went through, and the concept of how horrific the consequences of intolerance can be, unless and until they acknowledge the wrongs. We again come together to ask the government, both in Ankara and Washington, D.C., to once and for all recognize the Armenian genocide. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman. We are so fortunate in the Glendale area to be represented in Washington by such a wonderful Congressman, Adam Schiff. Congressman Schiff every year fights for recognition of the Armenian genocide, and every year he does it more forcefully and more forcefully. And this morning, when I went to my computer and I went to look up the Armenian genocide and hopefully pick out some facts, I saw an incredible video. I saw a video of Congressman Schiff on the floor of the U.S. House of Representatives speaking Armenian for 7 minutes. For 7 full minutes, he explained the story of the Armenian genocide to the world. What type of commitment can we ask for other than that by our congressman? Now, Congressman Schiff is in Washington. He was there this morning. He couldn't fly back, But we do have a special message from him on the video screen right now. Congressman Adam Schiff.
Hello and welcome to today's commemoration of the Armenian Genocide. My name is Congressman Adam Schiff, and I'm very sorry I can't be with you in person as we have votes today in Washington. But I will be joining many of my fellow members of the House and Senate at a commemoration this evening to honor the victims of the first genocide of the 20th century. As many of you know, I've been working for years with the Armenian American community to try to pass a resolution to honor the 1.5 million Armenian men, women, and children who were murdered by the Ottoman Empire from 1915 to 1923. Unfortunately, the government of Turkey has spent millions of dollars to defeat the resolution and has also threatened diplomatic retribution should the Congress vote to recognize the genocide. And sadly, their efforts have thus far prevented a vote on a genocide resolution by the full House of Representatives for many years. Despite Turkey's opposition, I will continue to push this issue at every opportunity. I feel a special urgency about the task as the number of genocide survivors dwindles with each passing day. We have a sacred obligation to the victims of the genocide, as well as to generations yet unborn, to ensure that this tragic episode in human history is never forgotten. I'm also mindful that in just 2 years, Armenians around the world will mark the 100th anniversary of the genocide. Our government must not continue to maintain this shameful silence about the killings, especially since American diplomats and journalists were so instrumental in alerting the outside world about what was happening to the Armenian people at the time. But even as we mourn those who have been lost, I'm also mindful each succeeding generation is a living repudiation of those who sought to murder and deport. Accordingly, I've emphasized the needs of today's Armenians and have been a strong champion of aid to Armenia and to Artsakh, and of efforts to strengthen education, housing, and jobs in the Armenian community here at home. So while I can't be physically present with you for today's program, please be assured that I too am keeping those who were lost close to my heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Schiff. That is where the battle is being fought, ladies and gentlemen. It is being fought in Washington. It is being fought in state houses across the United States. I just learned today that the Azeri government has tried to introduce several bills in state houses on the East Coast that would declare the acts of the Armenians against the Turks to be genocide. Now, that's the most outrageous thing I have ever heard of, but this is their plan. This is their strategy, is to stop playing defense and to start playing a strong offense. The only way we can prevent that is for all of us to be vigilant, for all of us to be active, for all of us to write the letters, to make the phone calls, to send the emails and the faxes to our elected representatives and to the agencies and other states that our organizations who are monitoring the situation very closely ask us to do. The representative from U.S. Senator Barbara Boxer, Rafi Nazarians is here. Thank you, Barbara Boxer, for all your hard work. And fresh from a speaking engagement in Fresno, we have our own city clerk, Mr. Ardashes Kasakhian, I understand somewhere in the second level there. Welcome, City Clerk Kasakhian. And ladies and gentlemen, we've got an excellent show coming up that will truly move you. I'm so proud to be a part of it, and I'm going to step out of the way and let the show go forth. Thank you very much.
Please welcome, under the direction of Mrs. Nora Bayramian, the Chamlian Armenian School Choir.
Պարզապես գիտենք ժայռից վանք կերտել Քարից շինել ձուկ եւ թրջուն կավից ուսուցման համար եւ աշակերտել գեղեցկին, բարուն, վսեմին, լավին։
Մենք քիչ ենք, սակայն մեզ հայ են ասում, մենք մեզ ոչ մեկից չենք գերադասում, պարզապես մեր բախտն ուրիշ է եղել, պարզապես շատ ենք մենք արյուն հեղել, պարզապես մենք մեր դարավոր կյանքում, երբ եղել ենք շատ ու եղել կանգուն, դարձյալ չենք ճնշել մեկ ուրիշ ազգի, ոչ ոք չի տուժել զարգից մեր պազգին։
Եթե գերել ենք լոկ մեր գրքերով, եթե տիրել ենք լոկ մեր ձիրքերով, պարզապես ման էր մեզ սիրարվել, իսկ մենք ինքնական նրան չենք տրվել, ու երբ ճարահատ մեր հողն են թողել, ուր էր որ հասել, որտեղ էլ եղել, ճանաչել ենք մենք ամենքին համար, շինել ենք ամուր, կապել ենք ամար, ամենտեղ հերքել, հասցրել բերքեր, ամենքին տվել միտք, արած, երգեր, պաշտպանել նրանց հոգևոր ցրտից, ամենտեղ թողել մեր աչքի թոլանք, մեր հոգուց մասունք և նշխար սրտից։
Մենք քիչ ենք, այո, բայց կոչվում ենք հայ, գիտենք դեռ չանցած վերքերից տնկալ, բայց նոր խնդությամբ ցնցալ ու հրճվել, գիտենք թշնամու կողմը խրճվել, ու բարեկամին դառնալ աճակից, դուրս գալ մեզ արված բարության տակից, մեկի փոխարեն 10 հատուցելով, բայց թե կամենան մեզ բռնի վարել, մենք գիտենք մխալ և կրակ մարել, և գիտենք նաև մեզ կրկոտ սիրել, բայց ուրիշներին միշտ էլ հարգելով։
Մենք մեզ ոչ մեկից չենք գերադասում, բայց մեզ էլ գիտենք, մեզ հայ են ասում, և ինչու պիտի չհպարտանանք, կան, պիտի լինենք ու դեռ չկայանանք։
Ladies and gentlemen, my co-chair for tonight's event is former Mayor Frank Quintero. Mr. Quintero could not be with us here tonight, but he is represented by his lovely wife, Janie. Welcome, Janie. Wow, what a choir, I have to tell you. We're very fortunate to have with us a scholar, a Turkish scholar, Umit Kurt. Umit Kurt is currently a PhD candidate at Strassler Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies at the History Department of Clark University. His main area of interest is the confiscation of Armenian properties and the role of local elites and nobilities in Aintab during the Armenian Genocide. He also co-authored the book titled The Spirit of Laws, Seeking for Traces of the Armenian Genocide in the Laws of Abandoned Property. Let's all welcome Umit Kurt.
Thank you so much. I'm truly honored to be here, to be with you, and to speak about my subject matter before you. I would like to thank, first and foremost, Armenian people in the city of Glendale and Mr. Ara Aharonian for having me here and for enabling me as such a prospective and young scholar to be with you for the commemoration of the Armenian Genocide as the first and foremost mass annihilation, extermination of a group or nation in the 20th century. The title of my speech today, tonight is the following: The Searching for the Traces of the Armenian Genocide in the so-called, of course, abandoned properties laws. A series of laws and decrees were issued in the Ottoman and Turkish Republican periods concerning the administration of the belongings left behind by the Ottoman Armenians who were being deported in 1915. The goal of my work is to attempt to understand the spirit of these laws and decrees, which were known as the abandoned properties laws. The central thesis is that these laws were a structural component of the Armenian genocide of 1915, as well as today's legal system, and yet paradoxically, they continue to this very day to protect the rights of Armenians to their properties. The majority of the relevant laws and regulations were issued in the Republican period. The Republic of Turkey and its legal system, in a sense, were built upon the seizure of Armenian cultural, social, and economic wealth and the removal of the Armenian presence. In its present form, we can say that the Republican Turkey legal system institutionalized the Armenian genocide of 1915. The abandoned properties laws are perceived as normal and ordinary laws in Turkey. Their existence has never been questioned in this connection. Their consideration as natural is also an answer as to why the Armenian genocide was ignored throughout the history of Turkish Republic. This normality is equivalent to the consideration of a question as non-existent. Turkey is founded on the transformation of a presence, Christian in general and Armenians in particular, into an absence. The fundamental motivation behind the assassination of outspoken Turkish Armenian newspaper editor Hrant Dink and the killings of 3 Christians in Malatya was anxiety about national security. The Istanbul Second Criminal Court of First Instance, which sentenced Arat Dink, the son of late Hrant Dink, and Sarkis Seropyan to prison for having used the word soykırım, genocide, considered the use of this word as a threat to national security of Turkey. And the Turkish National Security Council in 2006, finding the transfer of land records covering the 1915 period to archives and their presentation for the use of researchers to be contrary to national security, prohibited it. The truth revealed by these examples is quite plain. Because Turkey founded its existence on the absence of the other, every conversation on its existence inspires fear and anxiety. The chief difficulty in speaking on the Armenian genocide in Turkey lies in this existence and absent dilemma. What's important is the complete erasure and the removal of the traces of the Armenians in their ancient homeland. Interior Minister Talat Pasha's April 1916 telegram sent to Governor of Syria and the commander of the Fourth Army, Cemal Pasha, in connection with the Armenian church in Sis, is the clearest expression of this policy. Quote, basically, the goal of the abolition of the Sis Catholicate at the first opportunity, the expulsion of the Catholicos from there, aimed at completely removing the existence of this place, which possesses a very great historical and national value in Cilicia for Armenians and is presented by them as supposedly the final seat of an Armenian government, unquote. Law exists for this purpose, and in Talat Pasha's expression, everything was arranged in a way suitable for completely removing the existence of the Armenians. In this understanding, genocide is not a deviation from the normal operative legal system. It's in itself a product of the legal system and has been implemented by means of this system in question. Hasan Fehmi Bey, the first Secretary of the Treasury of the Turkish Republic, on 15 of April 1923, while discussing the new abandoned properties laws in the parliament, spoke about splitting a hair into 40 in legal theory and said it has been 2 or 3 years since we here set out to take into consideration the law of abandoned properties and as one of the most delicate and the fine points of our legal basis, unquote. Through these words, he demonstrated extremely crucial relationship between the law and the regime of genocide. it's necessary to mention several elements particular to the Armenian genocide in connection with the confiscation of Armenian property. First, the only group of people whose goods were being subject to liquidation in 1913 and 1918 period was the Armenians who were being deported. The property of Armenians who were not being deported was not confiscated. In various telegrams sent to the provinces, it was specifically specified that only the goods of people being expelled should be liquidated. Secondly, because the confiscation of the Armenians' property did not take place on the basis of a racist ideology, unlike the case of the Jews in Nazi Germany, no discussion of lifting the citizenship of the Ottoman Armenians took place during the deportation and genocide. Moreover, if Armenians were not removed from citizenship, specifically by a decision of the Council of Ministers or through their own individual resignations, their citizenship was preserved until as late as 1964. Thirdly, while the material wealth of the Armenians was being seized, it did not take place in the form of confiscation. That is, it was not said that the goods or their equivalent values will not be returned to their owners. On the contrary, everything, the goods and their value, will be administered by the state in the name of their owners, and everything was organized according to the principle that the goods and their equivalent worth will be returned to their true owners. Although when this would actually occur was uncertain. The choice of this path was due to the manner of organization of the genocide and its ideological justifications. But this characteristic was not suitable for explaining the need for confiscation of the goods. However, on the other hand, the forcible seizure of the goods, not in the form of confiscation, but through the preservation of the rights of Armenians to their ownership, created internal tension and contradiction. The state accepted that the true owners of the properties taken were the Armenians and adopted the principle that their equivalent values would be given to the latter. The tension or contradiction lies here. On the one hand, there is a state which does not wish to be accused of expropriating or stealing goods by force, and the language of the abandoned properties laws was set accordingly. However, on the other hand, the same state wished to destroy the basis of the existence of the Armenians and institutionalize and render official usurpation. The present legal system was founded upon this tension and contradiction. The same tension continued to exist throughout the entire period of the Turkish Republic, whether at the negotiations for the 1923 Treaty of Lausanne with the Allied powers victorious in the World War I, or during the development of the laws of adjustment issued in the 1920s, or even up to the 2001 circular of the General Directorate of Land Registry Cadastre. They are still present today and form the foundation of the Turkish legal system. The law was used in a dual manner for the removal of the economic foundations of the survival of the Armenians. First, in 1915, the Armenians were legally forbidden any sort of right of the disposal over the goods they left behind. They had to left behind. Secondly, although the law formally granted them the right to the value of their properties, not a single step was taken to reimburse them. None of the promised laws and regulations were issued. In an entire period of the Ottoman Empire and the Turkish Republic, the laws and decrees issued in connection with abandoned properties were intertwined with the principle of the goods and their values being given back to the Armenians. However, on the other hand, this procedure of restitution was not arranged in any manner, and the same legal system was used according to the principle of not giving the Armenians even a single inch. Especially the Republican period, in the rare case when some Armenians who somehow survived or their heirs were able to ask for their properties or their equivalent values, they only got lost in the corridors and the passages of the existing legal system in Turkey. To repeat my assertion, the abandoned properties laws and decrees basically do not deny the rights of the Armenians to their property. This is why these laws and decrees cannot be used as the reason why Armenians lost all rights to their properties. We'll never be able to get them back. It can be even claimed that the existing laws and decrees can be used as the basis for the thesis that Armenians are still the true owners of these goods, and it's imperative that they be returned to Armenians. The Committee of Union and Progress Government was aware that this was the situation too. A report prepared by an interministerial commission in February 1918 stressed that the rights of the Armenians to their properties remain. This historic report stated that although the Armenian abandoned properties were invested with a legal status, while the payment to the owners of the value of the properties transferred to the treasury of pious foundations and the treasury required by law is necessary, until now it was not able to be given, unquote. In other words, in February 1918, even by the Union and Progress Party, the Ittihadis, it was openly accepted that up until that day, the value of the Armenian properties had not been paid to their original owners. When it was stated in this historic report that though the Armenian properties have been designated for legal liquidation as required by law, although the remittance of the equivalent value is required to be given to the owners of the properties transferred to the pious foundation's treasury, and the treasury, they are not being given until now. It was clearly accepted that the equivalent values of the Armenian properties had not been given until that day. The language of the report in question is extremely clear. By February 1918, the equivalent value of the Armenian properties had not still been given to them. The report asked that the requirements of the law be fulfilled as quickly as possible, and that with the rights of the property owners being taken into consideration, the equivalent value of these properties be given to them, which did not take place. Similar views were expressed by the Turkish government during the Lausanne negotiations, when it was learned in Lausanne that another abandoned properties laws about liquidation had been issued in April 1923. The Allied powers of the World War I, especially Great Britain and France, forcefully protested this law, particularly because it was applicable to their own citizens. İsmet Pasha, who reported the situation to Ankara on June 22nd, received the following response, which must be considered one of historical import. Quote, in the abandoned properties law prepared and put into effect by the Turkish Grand National Assembly, our government's sole point of consideration being directed toward the protection of citizens' assets and the law for the purpose of the protection from damage of the abandoned properties of those fleeing, escaping, or absent, their sums are to be registered in their own current accounts. And in this respect, whatever is required for the safeguarding of laws will also be assured, unquote. As has been seen, the government again repeated that the true owners of the properties are the Armenians. And in order that the goods and possessions of the citizens of the state do not get destroyed, it took them for protection, registering them in their names. For this reason, it's extremely difficult to set forth the abandoned properties law and say that the Armenians cannot receive their goods or their equivalent values. As has been from the example cited, both the Ottoman and the Republican governments openly repeated the principle that Armenians possess rights to their goods. When we examine the laws and decrees concerning these three different aspects, we are confronted with an interesting picture. For the first aspect, that is, the topic of how the Armenians were going to be settled, so-called settled, in their new localities, the laws and decrees almost do not play any role. This was dealt with only in one decree, which was promulgated in 10th of June in 1915, issued at the very beginning of the deportations in an extremely limited manner, while in later laws and decrees it was not mentioned at all. It was as if such an issue did not exist. As for the second issue, a general principle was only repeated several times, that's all. It was accepted that the true owners of the properties were the Armenians, and the state was administrating these properties in their names. However, when and how these properties or their equivalent values will be given to their true owners was not discussed in any way. And no arrangement was going to be made concerning this issue. This absence at the first two levels shows us something. The Ittihadis, in their mental world and practical politics, considered that the Armenians, from the moment they were deported from their homes, ceased to exist. And making any sort of arrangement for a community considered non-existent was unnecessary for them. With such features, these extant laws are the best evidence to rebut the official Turkish state thesis concerning the Armenian deportations. According to the official thesis, the aim of the Armenian deportation was to settle the Armenians in a new region and give the equivalent value of the goods left behind to them. If there was such a goal, then there also existed laws and regulations in accordance with that. Indeed, the February 1918 report cited above openly accepted that the equivalent values of the goods was not given and no arrangement has made in this regard. A similar situation existed for the period of the Turkish Republic as well. Of course, issues at the first level concerning the relocation of the Armenians were absent. The Armenians had been to a great degree annihilated. Those surviving, if not assimilated in Anatolia for sure, remain outside of the borders of the new state. As far as the second level of issues concerned, the laws and decrees issued were like those of the CUP period, repeating the same general rule. True owners of the properties were Armenians. The state was administrating these properties or revenues in their names only because of the absence of the Armenians. Nevertheless, in order to be able to give back the goods, the Armenians had to be present together with their properties as of August 6, 1924. This was the principle accepted in the Lausanne Treaty. But of course, Armenians who wanted to return and got into the Turkey in order to have their properties back were not allowed to get into Turkey. The primary goal of the laws and decrees is by seizing all the movable and immovable properties of the Armenians to eliminate the physical foundations of the Armenians in the existent Anatolia. As Ahmet Rıza, who was the president of the Ottoman Parliament in December 1915, when the abandoned properties laws was being discussed in the Ottoman Parliament, the essence of the matter is an oppression for him. He says, "Hold me by my arm, throw me out of my village, then sell my goods and property later. This is not lawful at any period of time. Neither Ottoman conscience and law accept this." This issue still hurt and continues to hurt Turkey a great deal during its process of achieving full membership in the European Union. The reason why this is not discussed here is that I believe that issue is a byproduct of the Armenian genocide. Thank you so much for your patience.
Please welcome singer Hovhannes Shahbazyan, accompanied on duduk by Ruben Harounian, Bartan Harounian, and Artur Asikene.
Saint Turov Sova Արդյոք կարու եմ մի օր ժամանակ տեսնել Մասիսի գալխի երագույն մշեցին մեր ավլանով, օտար երկրներ ման գալով, դեժ մշեցին մեր ավլանով, օտար երկրներ ման գալով, մեր ավթուրքի պարկը տալով, զարդիր լավ մարմին քզի, մեր ավթուրքի պարկը տալով, զարդիր լավ մարմին քզի, ինչանից եմ թուրք ասկյանին, որը սպան է չոչ ապոյին, ինչանից եմ թուրք ասկյանին, որը սպան է չոչ ապոյին, մեր լույս թողեց զորոցին, զարդիր լավ մարմին քզի, մեր լույս թողեց զորոցին, զարդիր լավ մարմին քզի. Մեր հույս թողեց զորոցին, զարդիր լավ մարմին քզի, մեր հույս թողեց զորոցին, զարդիր լավ մարմին քզի, մեր հույս թողեց զորոցին, զարդիր լավ մարմին քզի, մեր հույս թողեց զորոցին, զարդիր լավ մարմին քզի, զարդիր լավ մարմին քզի.
Ladies and gentlemen, our keynote speaker is Micheline Aharonian Marcom. Micheline is the author of Three Apples Fell from Heaven, a book which has gained her critical acclaim. Three Apples Fell from Heaven is currently in pre-production to become a major motion picture with Shaker Kapoor, who is the director of Elizabeth, on board to direct. Let's welcome Micheline Aharonian Marcom.
Today, we are gathered here in this auditorium because of 98 years. Because of what happened in 1915, which many of us know personally and feel deeply, because of the stories we heard in our families, because of our personal family tragedies. If I could sit with each one of you, you could perhaps tell me the story of your grandmother, or uncle, or great-grandfather, or second cousin, and how she and how he survived, or did not survive, and of migrations and of diaspora. The events that made it so that we sit 98 years later in an auditorium in the semi-arid plain of Los Angeles, so many thousands of miles from historic Armenia, here to commemorate, here to remember, here to put on record, as we have been doing now for almost a century. I'd like this evening to talk a little bit about how I came to write my first novel in the late 1990s, Three Apples Fell from Heaven, which takes place in Hatpet and Mezre, my grandparents' natal town in Turkey, and which tells the story of these two towns during the period of the genocide. When I look back now, I realize it was precisely that big story, one so much bigger than a novice writer, I was 28 when I began the novel, and so much more important, that pushed me into being an artist, into someone who through study and apprenticeship to books of literature has tried and continues to try to tell the stories of the dead, of the denied, of the forgotten. Those whom official national histories did not and do not always acknowledge, but whom books can nevertheless always make a place for, a real and lasting existence beyond human life, perhaps, across space and the centuries, because art has this potential. Think of Homer's great epic poem, the Iliad, or Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, or William Faulkner's As I Lay Dying, of enduring. But if I am to speak to you of my first novel and its inspiration and my own journey as a writer, then I must tell you about my grandmother, Nani we called her, who was born in 1901 in Harpet. She was the eldest of 5 children, 3 boys after her, and the youngest was a girl. I was always told by my mother, while I was growing up here in Los Angeles, how my young grandmother saved her brothers and sister when she was only 14 years old, kept the family together after their father was taken in the middle of the night and never heard from again. We know now, of course, that the men were taken and murdered, and how their mother had died around the same time, perhaps of typhus, although the cause of her death is lost in the haze of war and tragedy. My mother told these things to me and my sister over and over again so that I think we would remember our grandparents and what happened to them, where we came from, how justice had never been served. And while I was given a handful of sentences about my grandmother's survival from my mother, I was also lucky enough to inherit a few items Nani managed to take with her from Harpet to Beirut, where she and her siblings eventually ended up. I have my great-grandmother's wooden bath sandals and a blue lace scarf. And there's also a small ivory-covered Bible which my mother keeps at her home. A friend of mine, Vahe, also has something that once belonged to his grandmother, a large wooden dowry chest which he proudly displays in the entrance to his home. And another friend, James, has nothing because his grandmother walked out of her village and lost everything on the deportation marches. I think about the things which some of the survivors were able to carry and keep, and I think about what was not carried and was lost. And also I think about the other things, invisible to the eye but tangible nonetheless, that were taken out of Turkey, parts and parcels of the culture of Western Armenia, the stories, the songs, the skills, the old knowledge tucked into memory, and the language itself. When I was a young girl, and still playing dress-up with those bath sandals in LA, years before I moved to Northern California and realized I would write books, my family and I used to travel to Beirut in the summers to see my grandparents and other relatives. This was the late 60s and early 70s, and I was not yet school age, and I don't remember very much. My grandparents' balcony off of their apartment in downtown Beirut, a long table filled with the colorful plates of meze in their summer house in Alais, the extended family gathering for dinner in the afternoons and evening, my grandparents, each holding a glass of whiskey raised in one hand and dancing. And I remember the singing. At night before bed, my sister and I were lined up before the adults and asked by my grandmother, as I recall it now, but of course this may be an addendum of memory. Memory is, after all, a bit nostalgic and sometimes unreliable, although truthful, it seems to me, in her longings. So it is my grandmother, Nani, who asks me and my sister to sing for them in Armenian every night before bed, and we do it, for the cousins and uncles and aunts and Nani and Dede. We sing the songs she taught us, the ones she loved the most. There's little else in that distant land of my memory. I see Nani in her polka dot dress, her heavy powder on her face. She is a petite woman, unlike me, and I'm 5 years old the last time I see her. There are many intervening years after the last summer we spent in Lebanon in 1973, until I began to write Three Apples Fell from Heaven in 1997. There's going to elementary school, there's forgetting whatever Armenian I knew, there are the deaths of family members, the remaining family leaving Beirut on its next migration, there's junior high school and high school for me, and eventually university, and moving away from Los Angeles. Why do I tell you this story? It takes us eventually to the time when I began writing, very poorly at first, as it turns out in hindsight. I'm in my early 20s and writing bad love poems, but feeling that I need to write, not exactly sure about what. I was dabbling, playing around, a little lost, and is my nature a little melancholic. It would take even more years for me to realize that writing is the thing that makes me feel happy, the making of stories and books the way in which I feel the most alive, that it is something I have to do. But I continued to dabble, and the feeling of wanting to write grew in me little by little. Fast forward a few years, and I'm 27. I think I'm depressed. I'm living in Berkeley and teaching high school kids, and somehow I can't remember why, I find a photograph of Nani when she was a young woman, before children and marriage in Beirut in 1922. She's lovely in the photograph. Although even young, she looks old, a little stern and a little sad. I put this black and white photograph of her in a silver frame, and I put it on my desk. And each time that I sit to write, I look at it and at her. At that time, she had already been dead for 17 years. Another year passes. I can't recall much. I was working a lot and trying to write something, but not sure how to go about it. At that point, I had written some stories, also very bad, and never about anything personal, never about my own history. And then after some sort of crisis that many in their late 20s seem to go through of identity, of what am I doing with my life and what's the point, I came to the realization that I wanted to write about my grandmother, fill in the handful of sentences I had inherited from my mother. At that juncture, I knew very little about the history of the genocide, and I felt ashamed to know so little, to have forgotten so much. So I started my novel with a few traces, a few memories, and from this I slowly began to build the world by reading and doing research. I read everything in English on the subject I could get my hands on so that I could begin to imagine my grandmother in the town of Harpet and what life was like during the years 1914 to 1917. And although I thought when I first began that I would only write about my grandmother, I realized very quickly that novels take on a life of their own. So while I began with the character Anagil, based on my grandmother, soon other characters in the town showed up, inspired by what I read, by the memoirs and historical accounts and photographs even, as if they too wanted to be written. I learned to let their voices be heard. And the beauty of the novel is that it can contain multitudes. Its form is expansive and shapes to the story that it is telling. There is one other moment I'd like to tell you of that happened at the inception of what eventually, after many years, became Three Apples Fell from Heaven. It was when I still knew about almost nothing except the sentences my mother had told me, although I knew the feelings of melancholy and loss. But I didn't know where or even how to begin a book. No words came to me. I was confused and overwhelmed by the bigness of the story, its import, and me without much experience and so much to learn. And from her perch on my desk, there was my grandmother looking out at me from the past, the place that photograph still sits today in my home. And during that period of time, a tune started running in my head, and this tune stayed with me for days, like the ghost of something, as if someone had erased a black charcoal drawing on paper, but the faint outlines were still there. I remember I finally called my mom, as I usually do in such situations. She has a much better understanding than me of the invisible world, the mysteries which exist and live with us, but which sometimes we don't acknowledge. But I didn't expect her to tell me much. I said, "Mom, there's this tune running through my head. I don't know what it is. I can't get it out of my mind." And I hummed it for her. And then she began to cry. I was surprised. Why was she crying? And then crying, she began to sing the song of my childhood summers in Beirut. My grandmother's favorite song, she said, one of the many I had forgotten. I think that was the real beginning of a small but fierce drive in me to eventually write the story of my grandmother in Three Apples Fell from Heaven. For although I was a young, inexperienced writer and I had so much to learn, I still do, writing books is a lifelong apprenticeship. When that song came back to me from the ether, it felt like a sign. As if my grandmother were trying to tell me something almost 2 decades after her death, that I must remember, that I must write it down and make a book of it, that I could do it. In any case, I made a promise to her then that I would try my best. In the intervening months, the first image came to me, the first scene I wrote, which ended up being the opening scene in the novel, of a young woman walking towards the center of town going to buy eggs. I didn't know why she was by herself when I wrote it, or why she was so nervous. That I would discover in later scenes over years. But I saw her there, Anagil, at 14, in the Armenian quarter of Harpet. In the end, it's a small thing, perhaps, a novel. But I believe that in small things, immense and mysterious things live. Priam, Hector's father in the Iliad, is still despondent at the death of his son when he sees Achilles dragging the corpse around the citadel 2,800 years after the poem was composed and Troy had not yet been destroyed, when I read it again just a few months ago. And Juliet is on the balcony, and Romeo is about to profess his feelings for her, and their love is ahead of them, beautiful and possible. And the character Darl in William Faulkner's As I Lay Dying, a poor white Southern subsistence farmer in 1920, still says some of the things that I think of late at night while I'm alone in my bed and can't sleep, but have never told to anyone. They all still live in the books. It is the sublime beauty of literature, its possibility for recording our stories in language and form and lifting them thereby into art, and possibly, if it's very good, and only time decides, a kind of transcendence. So my grandmother, née Anagil Demirjan, and her brothers, Nishan, Girard, and Stepan, and her youngest sister, Nevart, are still living in a book. And if perhaps you read it, you will see them before the deportation orders have been issued and the town exists, and Anagil leaves the house to get food for her family, even though girls generally do not go to the market in 1915. And you will thus see her as she was then, and as she always remains for her granddaughter, 7,250 miles away in Los Angeles, and 98 years later, my hero and my muse. And although that doesn't make up for the losses, the tragedy, the injustice, the sorrow and melancholy and rage, it is, I hope, something beautiful, something true, a recognition of our shared humanity. I'd like to end my talk tonight with a surprise, because although my grandmother had a somewhat melancholic and reclusive granddaughter in me, in her daughter she had an outgoing and optimistic and wonderfully talented singer. I've asked my mom to come tonight and to sing for you my grandmother's favorite song, the one I forgot, then remembered, and which runs through my first, second, and third novels about the Armenian Genocide and its aftermath in the 20th century. The song, which, despite all the losses and tragedies, has endured. Please welcome my mother, Nora Marcom.
Karun yekar karun anma Norits yes kezdesa himyar sirahakan Garmireir haker varterinama Cherari bes sarero yekar wanta Mek parev merdahali aynel morata Cherari bes sarero yekar wanta Mek parev merdahali aynel morata Tukhmazer deyir pırel yarkoti gonki Ahi malush sirun yar kosher tankneri Yes lalisiem tu hantu uches nayuyar Jerari bez sareo yekar wanta Mek parev merdal aynel morata Jerari bez sarero yekar wanta Mek parev merdal aynel morata Ashkarum ich tu sirun ezel kechshem Achi manush sirun yar kosher tankneri Yes alisiem tu khalatu uches nayum yar Jerari bes sarero որ հուամցա մեկ արև մեր դարից այն էլ մոհրացա ջերանի վեսս հարերով եկար հուամցա մեկ արև մեր դարից այն էլ մոհրացա
Im hokus larov hara In săpin sargov parara In vantis sango ganchara En sayat novi ushara Duduk ishunchov agena In vakus savir dimana Ashkar kisato kurana Nacham zitunis erana Im hokus larov hara In săpis sargov parara In vantis sango ganchara El sayat novi ushara
Hayır,
Wow, what an unbelievable dance performance. I don't think I've ever seen one before just like this, and I've seen quite a few. Congratulations, all you young children. Before we close today's event, we have to thank all of our sponsors: Glendale Arts for the Alex Theater, the Armenian National Committee, the Armenian General Benevolent Union, the AGBU Young Professionals Los Angeles, the ARS Glendale Sepan Chapter, AABC TV, Alco Printing, Asparez Armenian Daily Newspaper, the Crescenta Valley Weekly, the Glendale News Press, Masis Weekly, and Nor-Or Weekly. And all of the hard work has to be recognized. We have to recognize all of our committee members. We have Ara Aharonian, Arlet Der Hovhannes, Armik Avadisyan, Arutin Hartunyan, Lena Bozoyan, Lilia Vagyan, Maria Sahakyan, Nora Yakubian, Peter Darakjan, Talin Yakubian, Berj Karapetyan, and our city staff for his first year helping us on this performance. Dan Bell, good job, Dan. Elizabeth Gregorian, and Dean Lopez. Will the members of the clergy please come to the stage and offer a closing prayer for the event?
Մեր բայցար աբական սկանչելին Եթե կարելի է ոտքի ելեք Անոնոր եւ որդբո եւ օգնություն սրբո ամեն Օգնոց լանկցելոց Քրիստոս ասված արահանքից եւ ողորմություն եւ մեզ մեղավորած շնորհի աստողություն անցանած
Եվս խաղաղությանս դեր աղաչեսու վասնանկության օգնոցն աղաչեսու կսպրգիչն մեր Քրիստոս Զիզնոսան թարտարսն թասեսե Եվս մեզ գևսե շնորհի ողորմության իրո ամենագալ դեր աստված մեր գեցե որմյա
Դեր որմյա Քրիստոս որդի աստուծո անուխագալ եւ փարեքուտ Քթակո արար շագանսի օդոքի սանկուցյալ մեուգես միլիոն նադագս նասկիս հայոց որ անգան համի 1914 եւ աբա հնտասս մեծ բادرազմին իցերն ցեղասպան Թուրքին Վասն հավադո եւ վասն հայրենյաց հիշա դեր հավուր մեծի քալստանակայության քո արա արժանի ֆորմության քավության եւ թողության մեղած Թասավորյալ բայզարացո անսուրբս քո աչագոմյան թասուն զի դու ես դեր եւ արարիչ ամենեցուն թադավոր գենթանյաց սեմերելոց եւ քեզ վայելը փառք իշխանություն եւ բադիվ աժիմ միշև հավիջան սեդենից
Օրտնյալ դեր մեր Իսուս Քրիստոս համեն բոլորս միասին հայրը մեր որերգից սուրբ եղիցի անունքո եկեսե արկայությունքո եղիցին գամքո որպես եղից շևեգրի արքայություն եւ զորություն եւ փառք ավետյանց ամեն օրտնյալ կերուց շնորհացոր փոքվույն Երտագի խաղություն եւ Տեր Հիսուս եղեցնցես Դամենեսյան amen. Just before we depart, thank you very much Aranajarian and all the organizing committee and the City of Glendale for providing this magnificent evening in remembrance of our 1.5 million martyrs. God bless you and depart in peace.
Ուր էիր Աստված, երբ խենթացավ լքված մի ողջ ժողովուրդ, ուր էիր Աստված, երբ աղերսանքը մեր մարեց անհաղորդ, Ուր էիր Աստված, երբ ավերում էին չքնաղ մի երկիր, Ուր էիր Աստված, երբ խենթացած ցավից աղաչում էինք ամեն,